Ho, 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 ho! Merry Christmas! It's me, Santa Claus. You see how bright the sun is today? Coming through the North Pole in my little workshop here? Some days it's very bright. Sunshine's good for you, so I wasn't going to worry about a curtain or anything. We'll just enjoy that. Plus, I'm sure you can still see me. Just look how it changes the color of my Santa suit. Look at that. That's weird, right? Well, you remember, we are reading A Miracle on 34th Street. We are up to chapter 13, and I say we dive right in because of all the exciting things that have been happening in this book. We want to know what's happening to Chris, don't we? So we'll just get started on chapter 13 of A Miracle on 34th Street. Judge Henry X. Harper sat in his chambers reading over some routine mail and wondering what to get his wife for Christmas. It had been a good year. Things had gone well. He would no doubt be re-elected next spring. He thought the Christmas present ought to be a little more elaborate than usual, perhaps a fur coat. Finley, his clerk, came in, Mr. Morrow from the State Attorney General's office to see His Honor. Show him in, said His Honor heartily. Mr. Morrow entered smiling, a folder in his hand. He and the judge were old friends. Friends. Sorry, kids. They exchanged warm greetings. Just some routine commitment papers, Your Honor, Morrow told him. He placed them on the desk. His Honor started to leaf through the thick file. You'll find everything in order, Judge, said Morrow. I've checked them over. The lunacy reports attached from Bellevue Hospital. Bellevue, said the judge, reading. Age unknown. An old man, is he? Very old, Your Honor. I suppose I ought to read all of this, sighed Harper. You can take my word for it, Judge. It's a cut and dried consent proceeding. This fella calls himself Kris Kringle. He thinks he's Santa Claus. Oh, His Honor, exclaimed with a chuckle. He reached for his pen. As he did so, Finley entered again. Mr. Gailey to see you. What does he want? Asked the judge. He's an attorney. It's about the Kringle case. Better show him in, sighed the judge, and put his pen down again. Fred was polite but emphatic. He represented Mr. Kringle, the subject of these papers. In his opinion, his client was being railroaded. He requested a proper hearing at which he could bring witnesses. I thought you said this was cut and dried, said the judge to Morrow. So I did, said Morrow. This is the first I knew about a protest. The judge glanced at the papers again. Your Honor may sign them if you wish, said Fred, but I shall bring a habeas corpus in the morning. That won't be necessary, said Judge Harper. We'll have a hearing. 10 o'clock, Monday morning. Outside in the judge's anteroom, Mr. Sawyer was fidgeting nervously, waiting to see Mr. Morrow. For Mr. Macy had soon learned of Chris's absence, and he had quickly gone into the reasons for it. After interviewing Doris, he had called in Mr. Sawyer, and the exact words Macy had used were still ringing in Sawyer's ears. If he didn't succeed in getting Mr. Kringle released immediately, Mr. Sawyer himself would be without a vocation. His career at Macy's would be ended, and just before the Christmas bonus, too. As Mr. Sawyer sat there trying to keep him from biting his nails, Fred emerged from the judge's chamber and left with a nod to Finley. Who was that? Asked Sawyer anxiously. Mr. Kringle's lawyer, Finley told him. So Chris had a lawyer now? Sawyer didn't like the sounds of that at all. Alright, let's see. Get my pages stuck together. Hold on, let's see. Oh, here we go. I'd like to drop the whole case right now, he said when Morrow finally appeared. But Mr. Morrow shook his head. This Kringle's been committed by a city hospital. It has to go through the regular routine now. Sawyer was petrified. Isn't there anything we can do, he asked. Not a thing, said Morrow. Not Sarah. Morrow. All right. Not a thing, said Morrow. There'll be a hearing Monday morning. A public hearing? It was getting worse and worse, thought Sawyer. He asked about Mr. Kringle's lawyer. Oh, that's nothing to worry about at all, Morrow assured him. This Gailey's just a young punk lawyer trying to get himself a little free publicity. Publicity? The word electrified Sawyer. Articles in the newspapers? That was the worst thing that could possibly happen. I'd better talk to Mr. Gailey right away, he said as he dashed off down the hall. Sawyer caught Fred just as he was getting in the elevator. He introduced himself as Mr. Macy's representative. They were very anxious to avoid any publicity. If Mr. Gailey would cooperate, Mr. Macy would find some very generous way of expressing his appreciation. Fred laughed quietly. Mr. Macy had nothing to do with this at all, and both of them knew it. Mr. Sawyer had placed himself in this frying pan, and now he was squirming and wriggling to get out. But that publicity idea, said Fred. I'm glad you mentioned that. I'm going to need all the public opinion I can get to win this case, and publicity is just the way to get it. Much obliged, Mr. Sawyer. And he walked away. The last Mr. Sawyer saw of him when he entered the court reporter's room, Mr. Sawyer was even more unhappy over that. The next morning, prominent items appeared in most of the New York newspapers. The story was a natural, of course. Chris had become a celebrity, a nationwide symbol of goodwill, and now he was charged with lunacy. And our picture says, a fine way to treat their grandfather, he said indignantly. Oh, this hasn't even happened in the story yet, but there's the picture. Oh, that's the judge. And he has little grandchildren, and there's his wife right there that he was going to get the fur coat for. Oh. Let's see. The hearing was front page news. The evening papers carried even longer stories. The tenor of all the comments was the same. A radio commentator summed it up rather concisely. These are strange times, he said. Kris Kringle, the little Santa Claus, who alone is responsible for the wave of goodwill which has swept this city, and even most of the country, is in trouble? Monday morning, ladies and gentlemen, the simply kindly old man will appear before Judge Henry X. Harper, and he is charged with, of all things, lunacy. There's that word again. Incredible as it may seem, my friends, that is the fact. If bringing back the true Christmas spirit is a form of insanity, then these are very strange times indeed. At his home, Judge Harper heard the broadcast and beamed. His name was on the air from coast to coast. But Charlie Halloran, who was listening with him, wasn't pleased at all. Charlie was the treasurer of the political party which had put the judge in office. Not an office holder himself, Halloran was a potent power behind many thrones in the state and city, an astute politician, and a lifelong friend and advisor of Harper. You kind of look run down to me, Henry, he said thoughtfully. The words didn't want to come out. He said thoughtfully, I think you ought to take a few weeks off. Nonsense, replied His Honor indignantly. Never felt better in my life. Go fishing. Go hunting. Go anywhere, urged Halloran. Why should I, Charlie? Because this case is dynamite, Henry, said Charlie as he switched off the radio. You've got to get out of it in some way. But Henry couldn't. It was all arranged. Then he'd better have a sudden illness, said Charlie. Let some other judge handle it. Somebody who wasn't coming up for re-election in the spring. Ho, ho, ho. But His Honor was an honest man. He couldn't do a thing like that. Nor did he see why Charlie should be so upset. What was the matter with getting all this good publicity? Good! Exclaimed Charlie. It's terrible. You're a regular Pontius Pilate. Before you start, you'll be every little kid's villain. And their parents will hate you too. Nonsense, laughed Harper. At that moment, Mrs. Harper came into the room calling her grandchildren to come and say good night. She had promised their mother they would be in bed by 8, and it was way past that already. The children came scampering into the room and gave their granny a big hug and a good night kiss. Then they walked coldly past Judge Harper and up to bed. The judge stood there dumbfounded. A fine way to treat their grandfather, he said indignantly. I don't blame them, said Mrs. Harper, as she started after the children. Any man who'll put Santa Claus on trial for lunacy. You see what I mean, said Charlie dryly, and Judge Harper began to wonder. No, his grandchildren were mad at him, because he was going to put Kris Kringle, Santa Claus, on trial to see if he was crazy. In case you didn't know, children, lunacy meant crazy. Because, this cat can't really be Santa Claus. Can he? Is he Santa Claus? I'm Santa Claus. So, oh, and look, the sun has finally left during the telling of our chapter. So, it must have moved on across the sky, as it were. So, Be sure to like and subscribe my channel here so that you can get every episode, so you can get every chapter of A Miracle on 34th Street. And I will see you tomorrow. Merry Christmas. Goodbye.